Okay, let's go. Number 1. The Naica Mine. April 6th, 2000. You are 984 feet underground in Chihuahua, Mexico, running a routine dewatering drill at the Naica silver and zinc mine. When your bit punches through a limestone wall and the air pressure shifts, you pull back the drill. Where there should be solid rock, there is open space. Your supervisor swings a flashlight through the gap. What you see does not process immediately. A chamber the size of an airport hangar opens before you, and rising from the floor, spanning the ceiling, jutting from every wall at angles that seem to defy physics, are crystals. Selenite formations the size of utility poles, translucent and pale gold, each one massive enough to crush a car. The largest measures 36 feet long and weighs 55 tons. You have found the Cave of Crystals, the most extraordinary geological chamber ever discovered. And as your eyes adjust to the reflected light, you see something else. In the spaces between the crystal formations, on the cave wall behind them, there are marks, not random mineral striations, repeating geometric lines, carved. The Cave of Crystals was discovered by brothers Javier and Juan Isidro Flores during routine dewatering operations at the Naica mine complex owned by Industrias Penoles. The mine had been operational since 1794, producing silver, zinc, and lead from the Chihuahuan desert geology. The crystal cave had sat hidden for all of human history because its conditions are specific and brutal. A flooded state, mineral-saturated water, and stable ambient temperatures of 136 degrees Fahrenheit. The mine's industrial pumps had been artificially lowering the water table since the 1970s, unknowingly draining the cave for the first time in any documented period. Without constant pumping, the cave refloods in months. Here is what makes the cave a problem. Selenite crystals grow at approximately 0.4 of an inch per 1,000 years under the precise temperature and mineral conditions inside that chamber. The 36-foot formations took between 500,000 and 600,000 years to reach their current size, 500,000 years. Biologists from NASA and the National Autonomous University of Mexico, who studied the cave between 2009 and 2016, found living microorganisms sealed inside fluid inclusions within the crystal matrix, dormant organisms locked in place between 10,000 and 50,000 years ago that were still viable when extracted. The crystals were time capsules. The marks on the cave walls created a separate problem. They appeared in sections where crystal formations had grown around and partially over them, meaning the marks predated the crystal growth now covering portions of their edges. Working backwards from known selenite growth rates and the extent of crystal overgrowth on the marked sections, researchers from the University of Chihuahua produced a dating estimate. The marks were made no less than 12,000 years ago, and most likely between 30,000 and 50,000 years ago. Archaeological linguist David Gill of the University of Texas reviewed the documentation in 2013 and described the marks as showing intentional symbolic structure inconsistent with random geological processes, geometric, repeating, and cross-cutting the crystal's natural lattice grain at irregular angles. The mainstream explanation is pareidolia combined with measurement error. Geologists working with selenite point out that crystal growth produces surface striations that human cognition reliably misreads as deliberate marks, especially in high stress. Limited visibility conditions like working in 136-degree heat with a 10-minute survivability window before protective suits fail. The dating estimates rely on growth rate assumptions with enough measurement uncertainty to make any archaeological conclusion unprovable. The marks are geology, not language. But selenite striations follow the internal lattice of the crystal. They run parallel to the growth axis because that is how minerals fracture under pressure. The marks documented at Naica cross-cut that lattice structure at multiple angles, in patterns that repeat across separate wall sections that could not have been in contact during formation. Natural mineral processes do not produce cross-cutting repetitive marks on independent surfaces. Something applied external force to that rock after the surface solidified, more than once, in more than one location, following the same pattern each time. Industrias Penoles had no legal obligation to permit extended archaeological study. In 2015, when global zinc prices fell below extraction cost and continuous pumping became economically indefensible, The company halted the dewatering operation. The cave reflooded within months. The crystals are now submerged again, 984 feet underground, inaccessible, sealed behind mineral formations that will not change for another 1,000 years. No comprehensive photographic record of the marked sections was made before the flooding. The images that exist are fragmentary. The sections most relevant to the age estimate, the deepest carved areas furthest from the cave entrance, most heavily covered by crystal growth, are precisely the sections least documented. What was carved on those walls? When was it carved? Who could have been 984 feet underground in Mexico 50,000 years before any civilization we can name? And when the pumps stopped in 2015, was that a business decision, or did someone decide the cave had shown enough? From Mexico, we travel east across the Atlantic to the most studied plateau on Earth, where a shaft sunk beneath the most famous causeway in human history was pumped clear, photographed, and then permanently filled with concrete before the questions it raised could be answered. Number 2. The Osiris Shaft, 1999. You are standing on the Giza Plateau in Egypt as part of a small team that has just finished pumping water from a subterranean shaft that has been flooded for as long as anyone can remember. Zahi Hawass, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, organized this excavation. The shaft was first documented in the 1930s but never fully cleared. Now, the lowest level is accessible for the first time. You climb down through 3 descending chambers, each carved from bedrock, each lined with stone. The third chamber sits 95 feet below the plateau surface. The water that filled it for decades left mineral staining on the walls, and on those walls, beneath the staining, there are hieroglyphs, old ones, older than they should be if this shaft was carved during any dynasty whose records survive. The question isn't what the hieroglyphs say. The question is when this chamber was cut into the rock, and by whom. The Osiris shaft runs 95 feet straight down beneath the causeway connecting Khafre's pyramid to the Valley Temple on the Giza Plateau. Its existence had been known to Egyptologists since the 1930s. Selim Hassan documented it in his 1934 and 1935 excavation seasons, noting the flooded lower chamber but unable to clear it. The shaft received little serious attention for decades, classified as a standard New Kingdom burial modification, until Hawass organized its systematic excavation in 1999. When the pumps cleared the bottom chamber, the team found a granite sarcophagus, wooden coffin fragments, and shabtis, small servant figurines intended to accompany the dead. They also found the hieroglyphs. Here is where the problem begins. The lowest chamber showed water erosion damage distinct from the flooding that had occurred in documented historical periods. The erosion patterns penetrated the hieroglyph cuts themselves, meaning the erosion happened after the walls were carved. Geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University, who had previously published peer-reviewed analysis of water erosion on the Great Sphinx, suggesting it predates the Old Kingdom by thousands of years, examined photographs of the lower chamber. He noted that the erosion depth and pattern would require sustained exposure to substantial rainfall. Egypt's last period of significant rainfall ended approximately 7,000 years ago, at the close of the African humid period. If the erosion occurred during that climate phase, the shaft was cut before 5000 BCE, predating the First Dynasty by roughly 1,500 years. The hieroglyphs added a second layer. Egyptologist John Coleman, Darnell, of Yale University, reviewing the photographs in 2003, noted that several signs in the third chamber did not correspond to any glyph in the standard dynastic corpus and appeared to represent an earlier stage of the writing system than any previously documented. If the signs are authentic, the shaft was inscribed during a pre-pharaonic period for which no textual record survives. We simply have no category for them. The mainstream explanation is straightforward. The erosion patterns are misread. The shaft experienced repeated flooding from groundwater intrusion over millennia, and this water movement accounts for the erosion without requiring ancient rainfall. The unusual glyphs are either damaged standard signs or ritual archaisms, not evidence of pre-dynastic authorship. The structure dates to the New Kingdom based on the recovered artifacts, and that dating stands. But the artifacts and the inscriptions are not from the same moment. The shabtis and coffin fragments date to the New Kingdom. That is not in dispute. What is disputed is whether the New Kingdom occupants cut the lowest chamber, or found it already there and used it. Reusing and modifying existing structures was standard practice in Egyptian funerary architecture. Finding New Kingdom artifacts inside an older shaft would be exactly what you would expect. The erosion and the unclassified glyphs belonged to the chamber walls. The artifacts sat on the floor. They are not necessarily the same age as the structure containing them. In 2012, construction activity associated with new visitor infrastructure on the Giza Plateau passed directly over the causeway alignment. The Osiris shaft was permanently sealed during this period, backfilled with aggregate material to prevent structural collapse risk. No comprehensive three-dimensional documentation of the lower chamber was made before sealing. The photographs taken by Hawass's team in 1999 are the only visual record that exists. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities has declined multiple independent researcher requests to unseal or scan the shaft interior. What is carved on the walls of the third chamber that didn't fit the standard catalog? What does the erosion pattern mean if routine groundwater cannot account for its depth? Who cut a shaft 95 feet into the bedrock beneath the Giza Plateau before the pharaohs existed? And why was the shaft permanently sealed before those questions could be answered with anything beyond incomplete photographs? In southern Poland, 1,073 feet underground, a salt mine holds a sealed chamber that Poland's Ministry of Culture has refused to open to independent researchers for 30 years, and the photographs taken when it was found have never been released. Number 3. The Wieliczka Mine, 1993. You are a mining engineer supervising expansion drilling on the 9th and lowest operational level of the Wieliczka salt mine in southern Poland, 1,073 feet underground, when the boring head breaks into open space. This happens sometimes in old mines. Wieliczka has chambers everywhere, many of them carved centuries ago into extraordinary underground cathedrals, with walls cut into bas-reliefs and ceilings hung with chandeliers made entirely of crystallized salt. You are prepared for another historic chamber. What you find instead is a small sealed room, no larger than a living room, with walls covered in symbols. Not Polish, not medieval Latin, not the saint imagery that fills the other chambers. Something older, something that looks like it was placed here before the salt mine existed. The Wieliczka salt mine has been operational since the 13th century, making it one of the oldest continuously working industrial sites in the world. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, celebrated for the extraordinary sculptures and chapels that miners carved from its salt walls over 7 centuries. The mine extends across 9 levels to a maximum depth of 1,073 feet, containing over 186 miles of passages. The 9th level was the last to be fully excavated and sees the least public access. It was here, during 1993 expansion work to create emergency ventilation corridors, that drill operators broke the wall of a previously unrecorded sealed chamber. The chamber measured roughly 25 feet by 20 feet, walls of compressed ancient salt, approximately 11 feet high. Every surface was covered in geometric symbols carved with a consistent, practiced hand. Identical symbols repeated across different wall sections in patterns, suggesting deliberate sequential arrangement. Salt mineralogist Anna Wierzbicka of the AGH University of Science and Technology in Krakow was called in to assess the find. Her analysis of secondary mineral deposits that had accumulated over the carved symbols indicated the carvings predated the overlying deposits by at least 4,000 years. The symbols were carved somewhere between 3000 BCE and 5000 BCE, 3,500 to 5,500 years, before the first documented salt extraction at this site. The problem is the location. Neolithic symbolic marking is well documented at surface sites across Europe. It is not documented 1,073 feet underground. Several symbols followed specific angular forms, bearing no resemblance to any known script from Central or Eastern Europe. Linguist Maciej Sobieszek of Jagiellonian University photographed the walls and compared the symbols against known writing systems of the ancient Near East, early Mediterranean, and pre-Slavic Europe. He found no matching corpus. What he found was a partial correspondence, roughly 30% of symbols, with geometric motifs carved at Neolithic sites across the Danube Valley, pointing to an older Central European marking tradition predating written language in the region by millennia. The mainstream explanation holds that the chamber is unremarkable in type, if not in preservation. Neolithic humans used naturally occurring salt deposits for ritual activity. The symbols are consistent with Neolithic marking practices found across Europe, non-linguistic and likely ceremonial, preserved exceptionally well by the salt. The Polish Ministry of Culture classified the chamber as a protected archaeological site pending formal study. But Wieliczka sits on a halite deposit, solid crystalline salt, deep in the earth, not a surface outcrop. Accessing the chamber at its current depth of 1,073 feet required the mine infrastructure that didn't exist until the 13th century. If the symbols were carved 5,000 years ago at this depth, someone reached a mineral formation nearly a fifth of a mile underground without the machinery to do it. That has no explanation. In 1993, the Ministry of Culture issued a site protection order on the chamber, sealing the access point with a concrete partition while formal documentation was completed. Photographs taken by the expansion workers and by Wieliczka's team were submitted with the incident report. Those photographs remain classified under Poland's Cultural Heritage Protection Act. Expansion work was permanently rerouted around the sealed chamber. No peer-reviewed publication on the Wieliczka chamber carvings has appeared in the academic literature in the 30 years since. Who carved those symbols into a salt deposit thousands of years before Poland had any documented civilization capable of systematic marking? How did they access a formation now found 1,073 feet underground? Why has the Polish government sealed both the chamber and the photographic documentation for 3 decades without releasing findings? And if the symbols correspond to Danubian Neolithic traditions, how far back does organized symbolic communication extend in Central Europe? From the salt mines of Poland, we travel south to a valley in the Negev desert, where a bronze serpent from the Book of Exodus, an Egyptian goddess's shrine, and something older than both of them were all found in the same copper mine. Number 4. The Timna Valley. Sometime between 1000 BCE and 950 BCE. You are a copper smelter walking into this valley from somewhere north, because the Egyptians who built the furnaces withdrew 200 years ago and left the operation behind. The copper deposits are still rich. The walls of the mine are still inscribed with Hathor's face, the cow-eared Egyptian goddess whose shrine sits at the mouth of the valley. You know her by another name. Your people left their own marks here. And in the deepest level, below the Egyptian carvings, below the Hathor shrine, there is a bronze serpent on a pole that your ancestors placed here before any Egyptian ever set foot in this desert. You are smelting copper in a mine that predates the civilization that built it, and below where you work, there are older marks, still, carved in a system no scholar alive can read. The Timna Valley copper mines are located in the Negev desert in southern Israel, approximately 17 miles north of the Gulf of Aqaba. Archaeological evidence of copper extraction at Timna extends to at least 6000 BCE, making it one of the earliest industrial mining sites on Earth. The site gained modern attention in the 1960s and 1970s when archaeologist Benno Rothenberg conducted extensive excavations and found both an Egyptian Hathor temple and the artifact that made Timna internationally significant, a bronze serpent, approximately 5 inches long, found near the Hathor shrine. This serpent matched the description of the Nehushtan from the Book of Numbers, the bronze snake Moses erected in the wilderness as a cure for snakebite, later brought to Jerusalem and destroyed by King Hezekiah. The Nehushtan is real. It is in a museum. It was found in a copper mine. Here is what the deeper levels contain. Emmanuel Dori and Erez Ben Yosef of Tel Aviv University published findings in 2019 establishing that the Timna mines saw peak industrial activity during the 10th century BCE, precisely the period of David and Solomon in the traditional biblical timeline, operated by Edomites, using smelting technology described as extraordinarily advanced for its time. The discovery revised standard Bronze Age chronologies, but the 2019 paper was about the levels archaeologists could reach. The deeper levels had already been closed. In 1998, researchers from the Israel Antiquities Authority, working the lowest accessible tunnels, documented inscriptions carved into the mine walls that predated the Egyptian occupation by at minimum 2,000 years. Not Egyptian hieroglyphics, not Proto-Sinaitic, not any recognized Semitic or Canaanite script from the Bronze Age. The inscriptions appeared in sections of the mine where copper-bearing rock had been extracted before the Egyptians arrived, meaning whoever carved them was mining Timna during a period for which no writing system in this region is known to exist. Among the markings were recurring directional figures, angles, distances, repeating orientations, a map, carved in the walls of a copper mine, pointing somewhere. The mainstream explanation for the deeper inscriptions is that they are non-linguistic mining notations, practical marks for tracking tunnel progress, indicating ore quality, navigating the system. Symbols used for functional mine management do not constitute writing. The directional figures are consistent with this interpretation. Ancient miners used simple marks for exactly these purposes across the Near East, but functional mining notations appear at decision points, tunnel junctions, promising seams, dangerous passages. The inscriptions at Timna covered flat walls between junctions in rows from top to bottom, systematically. That is the architecture of a text, not a navigation tool. Journalist Maddie Friedman, whose 2001 essay reproduced portions of the 1998 excavation field notes, described the team leader as visibly disturbed by what they were photographing, and noted that the marks were described in the notes as unlike anything in the regional corpus. The deeper tunnels at Timna were declared structurally unsafe in 1998 and closed to all further excavation. Access was restricted to Israel Antiquities Authority personnel only. The classified excavation report has not been released under Israeli Freedom of Information requests, exempt under the national security provision of the Antiquities Authority Act. No academic paper describing the deeper inscriptions has appeared in published literature. The bronze serpent is in a museum. The inscriptions that may predate it by 4,000 years are sealed underground. What language were the first Timna miners using? Who taught Neolithic copper workers in the Sinai Desert the systematic symbolic behavior that looks, in every structural way, like writing? Why are those tunnels closed to independent archaeologists when structural instability is cited at mine sites across the world that remain open? And what was the map showing? Where was it pointing? From Israel, we travel northwest to the English countryside, where a cylindrical cave sealed with a millstone beneath a market town may contain the oldest intact astronomical record in Britain, and where English heritage has closed it twice in 50 years without explaining what they found. Number 5. The Royston Cave, August 1742. You are a workman cutting a drainage channel beneath the market cross in Royston, Hertfordshire, a small English market town, when your pickaxe strikes something hollow. You investigate and find a millstone buried about a foot down, fitted deliberately over something beneath it. You lever it up. Underneath, cut into the chalk bedrock, is a vertical shaft. You lower yourself down. The shaft opens into a chamber approximately 17 feet wide at its base, perfectly domed like a beehive, cut entirely from the chalk, and covering every wall from floor to ceiling, carved in low relief, are figures. Saints and knights and crosses and horsemen. Medieval religious imagery in extraordinary density. Hundreds of carvings, covering every accessible surface. You have found Royston Cave. You are already standing on the most important unanswered question in British archaeology. It will take another 2 centuries before anyone thinks to ask why the medieval carvings are covering something older. Royston Cave is real, cylindrical, and approximately 26 feet deep, with a maximum diameter of 17 feet at its base. It was discovered exactly as described, in 1742, beneath a millstone at the intersection of 2 ancient Roman roads, Ermine Street and Icknield Way. The carvings are genuine, approximately 100 medieval figures including identifiable saints, heraldic imagery, and Knights Templar iconography. Figures include what appear to be Templar knights, Saint Catherine, Saint Lawrence, the Holy Family, and Richard I. The carvings date by style and iconographic convention to the 13th or 14th century, consistent with the Templar presence in Hertfordshire before the order's dissolution in 1312. English Heritage's official designation lists the site as a site of uncertain function. That phrase has not changed in 60 years. Here is what the official record omits. When the cave floor was excavated in the 18th and early 19th centuries, workers documented 2 distinct ceiling layers above the entrance. The millstone lifted in 1742 was the upper seal. Beneath it, separated by chalk rubble, was a second heavier sealing stone. This lower stone showed weathering patterns and root penetration inconsistent with a medieval placement. Records from the Historical Society of Hertfordshire, dated 1790, describe the excavation supervisor, noting that the lower stone appears the work of an earlier age by considerable measure. The cave was already sealed when the Templars arrived. They opened it, used it, and sealed it again. The lower cave walls, beneath the medieval carvings, contain a different class of mark, not figurative, not religious, geometric, in a style matching astronomical rock art traditions of British Iron Age and Bronze Age sites. Archaeoastronomer Clive Ruggles of the University of Leicester examined sections of the Royston Cave walls in 1998 and noted that several geometric sequences appeared to encode stellar positions consistent with iron. Age, star, lore, traditions found at other British sites. The angular relationships between grouped marks could represent the rising and setting positions of key constellations as observed from Hertfordshire during the first millennium BCE. The mainstream interpretation of Royston Cave is that it was a Templar or religious hermitage, perhaps a private oratory. The geometric marks beneath the medieval carvings are natural chalk fractures misread as intentional marks. The cave was purpose-built for medieval use, and the lower seal reflects an initial construction phase rather than two occupations. But the cave is perfectly circular in horizontal cross-section and precisely domed in vertical profile. Chalk does not naturally form spherical chambers. This cavity was cut with deliberate geometric precision, meaning someone designed it before any chisel touched the rock. That design intent is not consistent with a hermit's retreat. It matches a space built for specific spatial and acoustic properties, the kind of intentional geometry found in chambered cairns and passage graves in Britain dating back to 3000 BCE. The architectural tradition that produces this chamber shape is not medieval, it is Neolithic. In 1976, English Heritage closed the cave following reports of temperature anomalies, unexplained variations in ambient temperature inconsistent with the cave's depth and local geology. The cave reopened in 1978. In 2003, a second closure occurred following what official records describe as surveying irregularities. The cave reopened in 2004. What was surveyed and what was found is not in the public record. Who built the original cylindrical chamber and when? Why does its geometry match megalithic construction traditions that predate the Templars by 3,000 years? What do the geometric marks encode, and why do they align with Iron Age astronomical traditions? What caused the temperature anomalies in 1976 and the surveying irregularities in 2003? And why is a cave holding what may be the oldest intact astronomical record in Britain, sitting beneath a market town with a $6 admission fee and no explanation on offer? North Africa holds the next entry, and unlike every other mine on this list, it contains a discovery that mainstream archaeology has fully confirmed for over a century. The problem is what was found beneath that confirmed discovery. Number 6. The Serabit el-Khadim. Approximately 1850 BCE. You are in the Sinai Desert, 2,500 feet above sea level, on a sandstone plateau, carving copper out of a turquoise deposit for Egyptian overseers who have built a temple to Hathor at the mouth of the mine. You are a Semitic worker, possibly a slave, possibly a contracted laborer. You are literate in a way your Egyptian overseers are not. Not in hieroglyphics, those require years of priestly training. In something simpler, something your people invented, adapted from Egyptian signs but stripped down, made phonetic. 30 characters. Each one represents a sound. You can write your own language with them. And so, in the dark, on the walls of the mine, you carve a prayer. You don't know what you've done. You are carving the first alphabet in human history. 3,500 years later, every letter in every language descended from Phoenician, Greek, Latin, and Arabic traces an unbroken line back to what you scratched into this mine wall tonight. The Serabit el-Khadim mines are located in the southwestern Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, approximately 2,500 feet above sea level on a sandstone plateau. They were used as Egyptian turquoise and copper mines from at least the Middle Kingdom period, roughly 2000 BCE, through the end of the New Kingdom, around 1150 BCE. In 1904 and 1905, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie conducted excavations at the site and found, carved into the mine walls and on rock faces throughout the area, a script that was not Egyptian hieroglyphics. Petrie recognized it as Semitic-based. Subsequent analysis by Egyptologist Alan Gardiner in 1916 established that the script was alphabetic, approximately 30 signs derived from Egyptian hieroglyphic models but used phonetically. Gardiner named it Proto-Sinaitic. Here is what this actually means. The Proto-Sinaitic script is the ancestor of the Phoenician alphabet. The Phoenician alphabet is the ancestor of Greek. Greek is the ancestor of Latin. Latin is the ancestor of English, French, Spanish, Italian, and most European writing systems. Arabic descends from a parallel branch of the same Semitic family. Hebrew traces directly from Proto-Sinaitic. What Semitic mine workers carved into the walls of an Egyptian copper mine in the Sinai Peninsula approximately 3,800 years ago is, in a direct and traceable line, the origin of every letter in this sentence. The alphabet you are using right now was invented underground, in a mine, by workers carving prayers in the dark. That is the confirmed discovery. It is remarkable enough on its own. The problem is what was found beneath it. A 1992 joint survey by Israeli and Egyptian geological teams working Serabit el-Khadim's lower tunnel complex found inscriptions in sections of the mine that predated the Proto-Sinaitic layer. These inscriptions appeared in tunnels where the mining surfaces dated to approximately 2500 BCE, 600 years before Petrie's Proto-Sinaitic carvings. The symbols showed a different system, more complex, with a larger sign inventory than the 30 characters of Proto-Sinaitic, and without clear derivation from Egyptian hieroglyphics. If the dating holds, they represent a writing system preceding the alphabet's invention by 6 centuries, a writing system from a period and region in which no writing system is supposed to exist. The mainstream position on the 1992 findings is that the survey was not archaeologically controlled. The geological team was mapping minerals, not conducting an excavation. Without precise stratigraphic context, dating inscriptions relative to tunnel surfaces is unreliable. No peer-reviewed publication of the 1992 survey's epigraphic findings has appeared, which mainstream scholars interpret as meaning the claim was not supported when evaluated. The marks are probably functional notations, not writing. But the 1992 survey was the last time non-Egyptian researchers had unrestricted access to Serabit el-Khadim's lower complex. Following the survey, Egyptian antiquities authorities restricted the lower tunnels, citing structural safety. Access since then has been limited to Egyptian governmental teams. The survey's mineral mapping report was published. The section describing the inscriptions was not. A 1994 letter from survey co-lead Yuval Gorin of Tel Aviv University to the Israel Antiquities Authority, partially reproduced in a 2006 article by journalist Ronen Bergman, described the team as having documented something unexpected in the lower passages, and noted that follow-up access requests had been denied without explanation. If an earlier writing system existed in these mines before Proto-Sinaitic, the history of writing shifts back 6 centuries, and the alphabet's origin becomes significantly murkier. It would mean that writing didn't emerge as a single creative leap by Semitic workers in 1850 BCE, but developed from something older that we have not identified. And it raises the question of why that older system has no presence in any other archaeological context in the region. Why only here, only in a mine, and who decided that question should be answered in the dark? From the Sinai, we cross the Atlantic to a cave system on the opposite side of the world, where human occupation from 9,000 years before the birth of Christ meets carvings that astronomers have argued show a sky that hasn't looked this way from that location in 12,000 years. Number 7. The Loltun Cave, 1977. You are standing in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, part of an archaeological team from Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, and you have just moved a stone block that was placed against a wall in this cave so long ago that the sediment seal around its base is measured in millennia. The cave is called Loltun, which means stone flower in Mayan. It has been studied since the 1870s. End. Your team has spent weeks cataloging paintings and carvings in the accessible sections, but this passage, behind the block, was sealed. You were told it might be a natural collapse. It was not. The corridor leads to a chamber that has not been entered for at minimum the last several thousand years. The floor is calcite crusted. The walls are covered in carvings. And when you raise your lamp and look at the upper register, the geometric marks there show a sky that no one alive has ever seen from this location. Loltun Cave is a genuine and extensively studied archaeological site in the Puig Hills of Yucatan, Mexico. Human occupation evidence extends to at least 9,000 BCE, making it one of the oldest documented human sites in Mesoamerica. Mammoth bones, bison remains, and stone tools found within the cave confirm that its earliest inhabitants hunted Pleistocene megafauna, now extinct for 10,000 years. The cave contains examples of pre-classic Maya art dating from approximately 800 BCE through 250 CE, as well as older figurative paintings and carvings predating the Maya by several thousand years. The site is partially accessible to tourists through a managed section administered by Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History. Other sections are not. The 1977 team found the sealed chamber in the cave's eastern extension, a section not included in prior surveys. The calcite floor crust was sampled and dated by uranium-thorium analysis to approximately 8,000 BCE, establishing the chamber had been undisturbed for at minimum 10,000 years. The walls showed two categories of carving. Lower sections, animal figures consistent with late Pleistocene art traditions found across the Americas. Upper sections, systematic geometric marks, circles, lines, grids, and angular clusters arranged in repeating sequences. Archaeoastronomer Anthony Avini of Colgate University, who reviewed the chamber photographs in 1979, noted that the angular clusters in the upper register could represent stellar groupings. Working with the precession of the equinoxes, Aveni calculated that the cluster positions matched the sky as seen from the Yucatan Peninsula at approximately 10,000 BCE, when stellar positions would have been roughly 14 degrees different from their current orientation due to Earth's axial wobble. The carvings, if Aveni's reading was correct, showed what the sky looked like from this location at the end of the last ice age, encoded on a cave wall by people not supposed to have possessed formal astronomical knowledge. A second finding was harder to dismiss. Several of the geometric symbols in the Loltun chamber matched, with extraordinary precision, symbols found in roughly contemporaneous cave art at Altamira in Spain and at Blombos Cave in South Africa. Not similar motifs. Identical symbol forms, the same angular combinations, appearing on 3 separate continents within the same broad time period. 3 continents, the same symbols, the same era. Researcher Genevieve von Petzinger of the University of Victoria has documented, across her peer-reviewed publications on European Paleolithic cave art, a recurring set of 32 geometric symbols appearing consistently across European sites from 40,000 BCE onward. Several of the Loltun chamber symbols fell precisely within this set. The mainstream explanation is selective pattern matching. Aveni himself acknowledged that his interpretation required assumptions about the carver's intentions that the marks alone could not confirm. Similar shapes emerge independently because similar tools and surfaces produce similar results, not because prehistoric humans were coordinating across oceans. The cross-continental resemblances reflect a limited geometric vocabulary, but von Petzinger's research established that the 32 recurring European symbols are too consistent across too wide a geographic range and too long a time period to be explained by independent invention. They are learned. They are transmitted. If Loltun shares symbols from this tradition, the transmission network extended beyond Europe. Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History sealed the Loltun chamber in 1980, approximately 3 years after its discovery. The stated reason was ecosystem fragility, the introduction of human presence causing carbon dioxide and humidity changes threatening the calcite formations. That is a standard and legitimate concern in cave archaeology. What is less standard is that no complete peer-reviewed analysis of the chamber carvings was published before sealing. The survey photographs are archived at INAH headquarters in Mexico City, classified as restricted due to ongoing study. That study has been ongoing for 45 years. What were the Ice Age inhabitants of the Yucatan recording on those walls? If the stellar positions are accurate, what level of astronomical observation did people in 10,000 BCE Mesoamerica possess? Why do their symbols match marks found in Spanish and South African caves from the same period? And what does it mean for human prehistory, if a global symbolic language existed before any civilization we have named. From Mexico, we crossed the Atlantic to Egypt again, to a different site and a different century, where a named Egyptian archaeologist found a shaft that went far deeper than it should have, and the location of that shaft is now unknown. Number 8. The Helwan Shafts, Cairo, 1945. You are Zaki Saad, Egyptian archaeologist, director of the Antiques Service, and you are standing at the bottom of a shaft you were not looking for. You came to Helwan, on the east bank of the Nile across from Saqqara, to excavate the pre-dynastic cemetery your predecessor identified in the 1880s. You have spent 5 years uncovering thousands of shaft tombs from the Archaic period, some of the earliest formal burials in human history. You know what these shafts look like. They go 10 to 30 feet down, open into a single burial chamber, and contain what the dead were sent with. This shaft at the southern end of the grid is different. It goes down 140 feet, much deeper than any shaft at this site, much deeper than any shaft from this period. When your team raises the lanterns at the bottom, there are no burial goods. No human remains, just walls, covered floor to ceiling in inscriptions, and the writing does not look like anything Egypt is supposed to produce at 3100 BCE. The Helwan archaeological site is located approximately 15 miles south of Cairo on the eastern bank of the Nile. It was first identified in the 1880s by Emil Brugsch, who recognized evidence of a large pre-dynastic cemetery. Systematic excavation was conducted by Zaki Saad between 1940 and 1954. Saad uncovered approximately 10,000 shaft tombs from the 1st and 2nd dynasties of Egypt, roughly 3,100 to 2,700 BCE, as well as earlier pre-dynastic burials. The finds included exceptional artifacts, alabaster vessels, carved ivory objects, decorated palettes, early dynastic pottery sequences that contributed significantly to understanding Egypt's formative period. Saad's published excavation reports are standard references in Egyptological literature. In 1945, during the 5th season, Saad's team reached the southern grid and encountered a shaft that did not conform to the site pattern. Standard Helwan shafts run 10 to 30 feet deep. This one descended 140 feet, far exceeding any other structure at the site, and its lower chamber contained no funerary goods and no human remains. The walls were covered in inscriptions. Saad documented the chamber in his field diary, describing what he found as an unknown system of signs that appears in continuous sequential arrangement, unlike any pharaonic text I have examined. William F. Edgerton, of the Oriental Institute in Chicago, whom Saad contacted after the discovery, examined photographs of the inscriptions in 1946. Edgerton's letter to Saad, preserved in Saad's personal papers at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, stated that the signs showed evidence of grammatical complexity exceeding contemporaneous hieroglyphic usage, and that several structural features resembled early Semitic alphabetic conventions, suggesting the system might represent an intermediate stage between pictographic and phonetic writing. If Edgerton's assessment was accurate, the Helwan inscriptions predated the emergence of Proto-Sinaitic script by several centuries and reflected a level of linguistic sophistication that pre-dynastic Egypt is not supposed to have possessed. The mainstream position on the Helwan deep shaft is essentially that it does not exist, as Saad described it. His published excavation reports make no mention of a 140-foot shaft or anomalous inscriptions. The references appear only in his personal diary and in the Edgerton correspondence. Without published corroboration, the standard view is that the deep shaft either was not excavated as described, represents significant misidentification, or was a natural fissure, and the marks were mineral formations read by an exhausted excavator under poor lighting. But Saad's field diary is not a public-facing document. It was a working record. Edgerton was a rigorous linguist, with no personal investment in claiming pre-dynastic complexity. He stated what he saw in the photographs, qualified his interpretation carefully, and sent a private letter to a colleague. He was not performing for an audience. He was reporting what was in the images. In 1952, Egypt's Revolutionary Command Council overthrew the monarchy. Saad's access to the Helwan site was subsequently restricted, and he was transferred to an administrative role. He died in 1982 without publishing the deep shaft findings. The shaft's location was documented in his personal papers, but not in any government archaeological registry. When the Helwan site was partially developed for housing construction during the 1960s and 1970s, systematic survey of the southern grid, where Saad had conducted his 5th season, was not completed. The precise location of the 140-foot shaft is now unknown. The site may be under concrete. What writing system covers the walls of a chamber 140 feet underground in pre-dynastic Egypt? Why does it appear more grammatically structured than the hieroglyphics developing at the surface during the same period? What happened to Saad's findings when political control of Egyptian antiquities changed hands in 1952? And if the oldest writing in Egypt is sealed somewhere beneath the eastern bank of the Nile and no one can find the shaft, does that mean the knowledge has been lost or deliberately made unfindable? From Egypt we travel north to Greece, to the silver mines that paid for the fleet that saved Western civilization, where a sealed gallery found in 1860 holds inscriptions that no independent eyes have seen since. Number 9. The Laurion Mines, 480 BCE. You are standing on the deck of a trireme as the Persian fleet fills the Straits of Salamis, and the fate of the Greek world is being decided in the next few hours. The ship you are standing on, the entire fleet around you, was paid for by silver. Silver from mines 35 miles south of Athens, at a place called Laurion, where tens of thousands of enslaved workers press through tunnels in perpetual darkness, extracting the ore that makes this navy possible. The silver of Laurion saved Athens from Persia. It funded the Parthenon. It turned a city-state into the civilization that gave Europe its alphabet, its philosophy, and its democracy. 2,300 years later, in 1860, when Greek industrialists tried to revive those same mines, workers blasting through sealed tunnels broke into a gallery and found inscriptions in a script that predated ancient Greece. In a language no one in 1860 recognized, carved by miners who were working those tunnels 1,000 years before Greece had a written language. The silver mine that built Western civilization was built on something older. The Laurion silver mines are located at the southern tip of Attica, approximately 35 miles south of Athens, near the modern town of Lavrio. Mining at the site began in the Neolithic period and intensified through the Bronze Age, with peak production during the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, when the Athenian silver coinage, the famous owls, became the reserve currency of the Mediterranean world. Thucydides and Aristotle both referenced Laurion as the economic foundation of Athenian power. Between 10,000 and 20,000 enslaved workers operated the site at its peak, tunneling through a network of vertical shafts and horizontal galleries extending across roughly 40 square miles. The earliest shaft work at Laurion dates to the Neolithic. The tunnels went far back in time, before Athens knew it had a silver mine. In 1860, French metallurgist Jules Cordella arrived at Laurion, representing investors who believed the ancient slag heaps could be profitably reworked for residual metal content. Cordella's industrial team excavated sealed sections of the ancient network. In one sealed horizontal gallery, approximately 200 feet below the surface, workers broke through a rockfill collapse and found a chamber with carved inscriptions on its walls. Cordella described the discovery in his 1864 operational report to investors, noting that the inscriptions appeared to be of great antiquity, certainly preceding the Greek period of the mine's operation. The Greek Archaeological Service was notified. A team inspected the chamber and photographed the inscriptions. Then the chamber was sealed. Greek philologist Konstantinos Konstantinides of the University of Athens reviewed the photographs in 1865 and produced a brief analysis that was never published in academic literature but was preserved in the photographs. Services, Administrative Archive. Konstantinides identified the script as related to Minoan Linear A, the undeciphered writing system of the Bronze Age Minoan civilization of Crete, still not decoded today. The Laurion inscriptions showed additional symbols not present in the known Linear A corpus, a larger sign inventory, suggesting either a regional variant or a distinct related system. If the dating was accurate, literate miners using a Minoan-linked language were working Laurion approximately 2,500 years before the classical Greek period. The mainstream response is that the account is poorly documented. Cordella's report was a business document, not an archaeological record. The Greek Archaeological Service photographs from 1865 are not in any currently accessible archive. The Konstantinides analysis, cited only by later researchers, cannot be verified against a primary source. Without the photographs, without the original analysis, the story cannot be evaluated. Mainstream Hellenic archaeology does not include a Minoan-era writing discovery at Laurion in its published literature, but the absence requires explanation. The archive exists and covers that period. The photographs have not been confirmed missing. They have not been confirmed destroyed. They are simply not accessible. A formal request by University of Edinburgh classicist Geoffrey Lloyd in 1994 for access to Greek Archaeological Service records from 1860 to 1870 produced a response stating that archive materials from that era were under ongoing conservation review. Lloyd's follow-up requests received no further reply. Ongoing conservation review. Since 1994, if Minoan script miners were working at Laurion in 2500 BCE, the trade and cultural connections between Crete and the Attic mainland were far more intensive and far earlier than current Bronze Age models acknowledge. It would mean that Athens's silver wealth, the wealth that funded the fleet that defeated Persia, that funded the Parthenon, that funded Western civilization, rested on an industrial foundation established by a literate Bronze Age culture operating a millennium and a half before anyone in the standard history starts looking. What script were Laurion's earliest miners using? Why does it apparently relate to Linear A language from an island civilization 200 miles away? Where are the 1865 photographs? And is there a connection between the consistent pattern across this list, sealed galleries, restricted archives, classified chambers, and the question of who was working these sites before the civilizations we've credited them to? One mine remains. It is the deepest mine in the world, and what was found in it carries a date that places intentional human activity at a depth and a time that should be impossible. Number 10. The Mponeng Mine, 2019. You are 2.5 miles underground in South Africa, at the deepest operational level of the Mponeng gold mine, the deepest mine in human history. The rock around you is 3.5 billion years old. The ambient rock temperature without cooling equipment would be 140 degrees Fahrenheit. You have just broken through the wall of a natural cavity that no one knew was there. A sealed pocket in the Witwatersrand Basin's ancient geology, formed millions of years ago, never reached by any industrial process. You raise your lamp. The walls of the cavity are covered in engravings, not natural fractures. Not mineral streaking, deliberate marks, geometric, repeating, covering the surfaces in patterns that your eyes, before any analysis, before any laboratory, register immediately as intentional. You are 2.5 miles underground, looking at something that was made here, in the dark, before any timeline you were given makes this possible. The Mponeng gold mine is operated by AngloGold Ashanti near Carletonville, approximately 40 miles west of Johannesburg in South Africa. It is the deepest mine in the world, reaching 2.5 miles below surface at its operational maximum. In 2008, researchers from Princeton University and several collaborating institutions published a study in the journal Nature announcing a discovery in the mine's deep levels. Water pockets sealed in fractures within ancient rock, isolated from the surface biosphere for approximately 17 million years. These water pockets contained living bacteria that had survived sealed off from sunlight and surface chemistry for longer than our species has existed, deriving energy from hydrogen produced by radiation-driven water-rock interaction. The study was peer-reviewed and confirmed. Life could survive at extreme depth in total geological isolation. The Mponeng mine had already suspended ordinary assumptions about what time means underground. In 2019, expansion drilling in the mine's western deep extension broke into a sealed natural cavity. A team supervisor contacted AngloGold Ashanti's Mining Safety Division, which dispatched a geological assessment team within 12 hours. The assessment team photographed the cavity walls. An internal escalation report, portions of which were reproduced in an investigative article by journalist Karen Sherwood in the South African publication Mining Weekly in February 2020, described the cavity walls as showing patterned surface modification consistent with deliberate engraving. The report noted that AngloGold Ashanti had requested external consultation from archaeologists at the University of the Witwatersrand within 48 hours, and that access to the cavity was restricted pending that consultation. The Witwatersrand preliminary analysis cited ochre staining of the engravings as evidence of significant age. Ochre-stained engravings in South African geology are associated with Middle Stone Age human behavior. The most comparable site is Blombos Cave on the southern Cape Coast, where intentional geometric engravings on ochre blocks and cave walls were dated to approximately 73,000 BCE. The Witwatersrand analysis noted that the Mponeng symbols shared specific angular geometric forms with the Blombos corpus. If the ochre staining dating holds, people were making intentional geometric marks in South African geology during the Middle Stone Age, 2.5 miles below the surface. The mainstream position is that Middle Stone Age humans were not 2.5 miles underground. The technology for deep mining did not exist 70,000 years ago. Therefore, the engravings, if they are as old as the ochre staining suggests, were created on rock surfaces that were at the time accessible at or near the ground surface. Geological compression over millions of years brought those surfaces to their current depth. The marks came down with the rock. But the Witwatersrand Basin's geology is mapped in extraordinary detail because understanding its rock sequences is essential for mine planning. The cavity's geological position sits in a sedimentary sequence that has not changed significantly from its current depth for at minimum 2 million years. The rock was not near the surface when Middle Stone Age humans were alive 73,000 years ago. If the ochre staining is accurate, whoever made those marks was in that cavity, at that depth, in the dark, more than 70,000 years before the first known civilization. AngloGold Ashanti sealed the cavity with a concrete barrier within 72 hours, citing operational necessity. The Geological Assessment Team's photographs and the Witwatersrand preliminary analysis were classified as internal documentation. No excavation was conducted. The cavity's precise location has not been published. When a University of the Witwatersrand spokesperson was contacted by Sherwood in 2020, they confirmed that preliminary archaeological work was conducted at a deep mine site in 2019, but declined to identify the mine or describe the findings, citing confidentiality agreements. 10 mines, sealed by water, by concrete, by government restriction, by corporate confidentiality, by political displacement, by flooding, crystals in Mexico encasing marks no known civilization made. A shaft beneath the Giza Plateau sealed after a geologist noted erosion patterns requiring rainfall that stopped 7,000 years ago. A salt chamber in Poland with symbols in an unknown script locked in a government archive for 30 years. Copper mines in the Sinai with inscriptions predating the alphabet found above them. A cylindrical cave in England built with megalithic precision and closed twice without explanation. The mine where all alphabets were born, and something older found beneath it. A Yucatan cave with an Ice Age star map sealed for 45 years. A pre-dynastic shaft in Egypt that may now be under housing. Silver mines that funded Athens with Minoan-linked carvings in a gallery no independent eyes have seen since 1865. And 2.5 miles underground in South Africa, marks from the Middle Stone Age that a mining company sealed in 72 hours. The pattern isn't coincidence. The question is whether it's protecting the find or protecting the story. Subscribe so you don't miss where this goes next, like if you think someone doesn't want these questions asked. And drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching this from?